This was in 2019. Me and my buddy Jackson have a hobby for exploring abandoned places. I guess we were urban explorers, but we weren't really the type to do anything too illegal, or at least nothing too risky, which usually meant finding places further out from the city and in more remote areas. For this one, Jackson and I had found a small Reddit thread of a fire lookout tower posted in the community for abandoned places in our state. The OP didn't mention where it was though, and seemed like he was trying to keep it from being too available to everyone online. I tried my luck at messaging him directly, and although he was hesitant, I eventually was able to get the coordinates from him, so long as I didn't pass it around to everyone else and ruin the spot. When we looked it up on maps, we could see there was a structure there, so it all looked legit. There weren't any other posts or anything on it though, so it really seemed like the place was completely forgotten. We packed up and headed out there on a Monday morning. Getting there was a bit sketchy. No trails really, and no clear sightlines of where we were headed. Just had to trust the GPS. The woods also had this really strange feeling. If Jackson wasn't there with me, I 100% would have booked it out of there and never looked back, just from the feeling alone. Jackson also said he felt off, but we still continued walking. All the way up until just about a minute from the fire lookout, there were no signs whatsoever that we were even remotely in the right place, or going in the right direction. No signs of trails, footpaths, or views of the structure. Nothing. It wasn't until we were literally 30 feet from it that we even saw it for the first time. We reached a clearing in the trees, and on the hill was, well, the lookout tower. It wasn't exactly the kind we were hoping for, but I was just happy it existed and the GPS got us there. This one wasn't sitting on tall stilts. It was basically just a cabin on top of the hill, with a view over the forest. We circled the tower for a minute. The wood siding was gray and splintered, and the windows were either broken or covered in grime and fog so thick that it looked painted over. One side of the roof was even partially caved in, and the whole place sort of felt like it was leaning slightly, like the whole structure had shifted on its foundation. Jackson was noticeably more excited than I was. I think I still had that lingering, uneasy feeling from the woods, but I didn't want to be a buzzkill after we'd come out all this way, so I didn't say anything. Jackson knocked on the door, then opened it. We stepped in. The inside was dark. Even though windows surrounded pretty much all sides, the fog and grime that I mentioned earlier prevented pretty much any light from coming in. There was also a bunch of junk scattered on the floor. Some old tools, a broken lantern, and even some beer cans that looked decades old. But eerily, there was a piece of paper taped to the far wall. It was noticeably out of place, being clean and new from someone recently. On it were 3 words: "Hope you're happy." I showed it to Jackson, and we both were pretty confused. I mean, clearly this had to be the stupid Redditor messing with us, leaving a cryptic note to scare us, knowing that we were gonna show up. Still kinda weird though. If it wasn't some joke, it seemed sort of passive-aggressive. Anyway, the sun was getting low, so I shut the door and we settled in for the night. I got out the camping stove and started boiling water to make ramen for dinner. Strangely, that whole night felt off. We didn't really talk for a while. I made the food, we ate, and just sat there, listening to the breeze make the cabin walls creak. Neither of us sparked up a conversation, which was really unusual. Just felt like there was almost this dreadful feeling. And I can't speak for Jackson, but I assume he felt it too, since he didn't speak either. Eventually, when it got later, we both got in our sleeping bags and fell asleep. When I woke up, I remember opening my eyes to the pitch black room and hearing just the slight creaks of the cabin. But something felt like it was missing, and that's when I rolled over and looked at Jackson's empty sleeping bag. I quickly sat up and looked around. "Jackson?" It was quiet. I froze up for a moment. "Jackson?" After I said his name again, there was a sudden thud against the wood. Then again. I tilted my head up and looked at the roof. Slow, quiet thuds moved across the ceiling. And then suddenly the door opened and Jackson stepped inside, nearly giving me a heart attack. He looked surprised to see me awake, but I told him to shush before he said anything. But whatever the hell I'd been hearing had stopped. Jackson said he just went out to take a leak. I asked if he saw anything on the roof, and he looked at me like I was crazy. I went out to see for myself, and saw nothing. At that point, I thought maybe I was crazy. We got back in our sleeping bags and slept through the rest of the night. Next day, things still felt a little off there. I really didn't know what it was. Just everything felt too quiet and still. Me and Jackson spent most of the day exploring around the area, walking around and looking for anything else cool, but there really wasn't anything. The forest seemed to be the same half-dead trees for miles and miles and miles. Around sundown again, we got back to the lookout tower, ready to get back inside and settle for the night. But as Jackson went to close the door, he suddenly stopped. I looked back at him. He was frozen in place, and his eyes were fixed on something. Then he said my name, telling me to come over there. I walked over and looked out the doorway. Standing maybe 40 feet from the cabin, right on the line between the clearing and the trees, there was a man. The man had shaggy, unkempt hair and a scraggly beard. He wore a gray flannel and had a rifle slung over his shoulder. Clearly, this guy was some sort of hunter. But what was really eerie was the look he had over his face. His eyes were dead, and he had a dreadful, empty look. "Hey, can we help you? Are you good?" I called out. The guy stared across the field at us for a few more seconds, then slowly turned and walked straight into the woods. I looked at Jackson, and both of us were a little unsure about that guy. We made food and stayed in for a couple hours. We were a little more conversational, talking about our plan to leave tomorrow morning, and definitely not recommend anyone to ever come here. And during that conversation, a faint shadow suddenly moved across Jackson's face. I quickly turned around and looked at the window behind me. Could barely see anything through it, but there was a shape, maybe a figure, moving along the outer wall. Jackson was quiet, so I knew he saw it too. The figure moved all the way around to where the door was. My heart was racing. There was a long pause, then 3 soft knocks against the door. Jackson immediately got up and slammed the bolt lock down. There was another pause, then 3 loud, heavy hits shook the door. Neither of us moved. We were frozen, just completely horrified. But after those knocks, there wasn't anything else. No footsteps, and no voices or shadows. I seriously have no clue how long we waited. Eventually, Jackson unlocked and opened the door, finding no one and nothing out there. We stayed up through the entire night, both paranoid and feeling really uneasy. We tried to figure out who we thought it was, if it was the hunter from earlier. He did look creepy as hell, but this didn't feel like it was him. It felt like something else. I know that sounds crazy, but I don't know what else to think. When the sun came up, we booked it out of the cabin. The whole way back through the woods was just unsettling and eerie, like we were being watched. When we made it out, the first thing I did was check on Reddit with the OP who gave us the coordinates to ask if he had any weird encounters at the lookout tower. But the post was removed, and the account was deleted. Honestly, I think the guy had similar encounters and experiences, and likely that's why he left the ominous notes of "Hope you're happy." Jackson and I are still great friends, and still actually explore abandoned places. We've had other encounters, but none like this one. Both of us are still genuinely freaked out about what happened during the 2 nights we visited that lookout tower, and have no idea what it was that we experienced there.
Think Verizon's best 5G network is expensive? Think again. This season, bring in your AT&T or T-Mobile bill to a Verizon store for a better deal. Then use those unwanted bills to wrap up goodbye gifts to AT&T.
I'm keeping my name anonymous for privacy reasons, but this happened just 5 years ago. At the time, I was traveling around with my dog Rocky. I know, not the most unique name, but I'd named him after the mountain range I found him stray in 3 years prior. He was a medium-sized Australian Shepherd mix, and the vets said he was between 6 to 7 years old when I found him. There was no information on him whatsoever, and after weeks of being unsuccessful in finding his owners, I made the decision to adopt him. He became sort of my adventure buddy, going on hikes and backpacking trips year-round, and we both loved it. The trip this happened on was honestly nothing crazy. It was just supposed to be a 1-day in, 1-day out backpack along a firebreak trail to a retired lookout tower. I really couldn't find too much info on the place, at least not up-to-date info. Best I could find were some really old rules about it being a non-rentable, first-come, first-serve public rest shelter with a 3-night limit. But like I said, that info was super outdated. I didn't care too much to do any more research than that, because I wasn't even planning to stay the night in the tower. The idea was to reach the ridge, take a look around, and hike another few miles down to a creek with a small tent campsite. However, this whole idea fell through, as when me and Rocky were about 30 minutes out from the tower, dark, heavy clouds started rolling overhead. We rushed to the tower, and with a view of the valley from the ledge, I could see a really bad rain and thunderstorm hitting the mountain directly across from us. It looked like it was headed our way. I didn't mind so much camping in my tent during a storm, but the problem was that I didn't know if we could make it to the campsite and set up before the storm hit. After a couple minutes of thinking, the decision was made for me by the sudden onset of rain downpouring on the lookout tower. So I decided to hunker down inside the tower with Rocky, at least to let the storm pass. It was then that I got a really good look at the place. It was mostly what I expected. White paint thinning on the walls, a rusted stove built into the corner, and aside from that, completely empty. Not even a trashy old mattress that most public forest shelters usually have. Within minutes, the storm hit twice as hard. Rain was coming down so heavy I couldn't even see the forest past the windows, and I could feel the wind cutting inside between the gaps in the wood. The tower had a bit of give to it as well, swaying a bit every time a gust of wind would hit it, and it didn't look like it was slowing down anytime soon. I laid out my sleeping bag to make a more comfortable rest area, then took out my dinner stuff and made a little freeze-dried meal. Rocky was pretty shaken by the storm though, He wouldn't settle, pacing near the door with his tail tucked and quietly whining. He never liked storms, but this one definitely made him feel worse than usual. Thought it was probably the movement of the tower, or maybe even the heights. I called him over and had him sit next to me so I could pet him to quiet him down and get him to relax a little. But when it was just the sound of the rain drumming on the roof, I heard something else. It was a faint, hollow thunk sound, like something metal shifting beneath the floor. It was subtle enough to blend in with the rain, and only noticeable during short periods where the rain would slow down a bit. After a minute or two, though, I couldn't hear it anymore. Or maybe my mind drowned it out. I'm not really sure. Eventually, I laid down and Rocky burrowed in the sleeping bag with me. The rain and thunder started to feel comforting, I guess, and I fell asleep. Next thing I knew, I woke up and checked my watch, seeing it was just past 2 a.m. And right away, something was missing. The noise of rain and everything. It was just silent. I sat up, realizing Rocky wasn't in my sleeping bag anymore. He was over by the door, giving me that look like he needed to go out, and quietly whining again. I took a moment, then got up and put my shoes on and grabbed the flashlight. I opened the door and stepped outside with him, walking down the creaky steps and letting him roam the field between the tower and the forest. After the hours of heavy rain, the dead silence of the forest now was kind of unsettling. I stayed near the tower, just keeping my flashlight on Rocky as he did his business. But then I heard the slightest sound behind me. A thin metal squeak from a small wind gust. I turned around and pointed my flashlight under the lookout tower, immediately spotting what looked like a metal cellar door, like one of those underground ones that old houses sometimes have. I figured this one must have been for storage back when the tower was in use, maybe for keeping dry firewood and tools or something. But then I remembered the sounds I heard overnight, the metal thump sounds. And honestly, something in my gut knew the moment I saw those cellar doors that those sounds had to be from the cellar doors opening and closing, or maybe even something moving around inside the cellar. I kept the flashlight on it and approached it, then slowly lifted one of the doors and peeked inside. There were maybe 5 or 6 steps. It didn't go down very far, and on the stairs there were fresh, wet spots of mud going up every step. But after looking at it for just a moment, Rocky suddenly barked. It was just one sharp, terrified bark. I dropped the door closed and spun around, just quick enough to see something shift in the tree line just past Rocky. I immediately called him back, then ran up the stairs and inside the tower. Thankfully, I'd only unpacked my sleeping bag, so I quickly rolled it up and clicked it to my backpack. Someone was out there watching us, and I was not staying to find out why. I made Rocky stay close, and we quickly exited the tower and got back down to the base. I instinctively turned around and shined the flashlight back under the tower at the cellar. The doors were open. Then I looked down at Rocky. His eyes stared at the cellar intensely, clearly scared of whatever was in there. We hurried away, getting right back onto the firebreak trail. We pretty much ran for a whole mile before the rain started pouring down again, so we took it easy and eventually made it back. I called the Forest Service that morning, and it only made me more terrified of what could have happened. The ranger said that the lookout tower I mentioned was not in service and off limits to the public. I couldn't get him to spill any specifics, but from the little hints I felt like I got, it sounded like some things had been happening in that area that caused them to just stop allowing people to use the tower. That's why I couldn't find any information on it. I think there's a lot of possible explanations for what happened out there, but none of them make me feel any better. The most harmless explanation is someone was living in the cellar of the retired tower for who knows how long. But even then, why did they leave in the middle of the night? And why were they watching us from the trees? It's been a while, so I've mostly come to terms with not having any answers. But I think the chances are slim that if I hadn't have left, nothing else would have happened.
Black Friday is the best time to upgrade your sleep at Raymore and Flanagan. Save big on
This happened 3 decades ago. Obviously, I'm an older guy now, but when I was in my 20s, I used to do summer work with the Forest Ranger Service as a fire lookout. I did it for almost 9 summers in a row. It was paid work, so while I was in college and off for summer breaks, I loved it. Might have even done it for free. The job was simple and straightforward, essentially marking down a few data points once an hour, like temperature, wind, and humidity, and of course, scouting for fires. Aside from that, I was alone up there and could do really whatever I felt like. Often, I would walk the trails around the lookout station and just enjoy the scenery. Over the years, I became very capable in the woods, and aside from this one night, I never really had anything unsettling happen. The days would just go by sort of the same, and were always peaceful and relaxing. I don't remember most of the start of this day, because it was a very repetitive, normal day at the lookout station. Even a few hours past sunset, nothing really happened. I recorded my last data points for the night and radioed in to the ranger station that I was done with my shift and clocking out for the day. The overnight ranger that was basically there every night was another young man, Brady. I'd only met him in person a handful of times, but I talked to him almost every night, as there wasn't all that much else to do. And whenever there were important things to radio in, he was the guy to receive my calls. After making some food and resting on the bed for a bit, I decided to get some air and head onto the balcony to look at the clear night sky. Took all but half a second to notice a bright, flickering light below the tower. It was just in the trees, not more than a quarter mile from me. There were way too many trees in the way to get a perfect view, but I knew it was a campfire of some sorts by the color and the way it was flickering. Now, at the time, there was a campfire ban due to dry weather, so this was actually a pretty big deal that needed to be sorted immediately. I radioed in to Brady, asking about permits and if he knew who could have been out there. But he said he had no clue, and that no permits were handed out to be camping there that night. I told him exactly where it was, and that it was strangely close to my lookout station. Brady told me since it was so close to just go let the campers know to put it out and to not even worry about making them leave or anything, even though they didn't have a permit to be in the area. So I took my radio and my flashlight and headed down the stairs, then began walking toward the campfire. Really, I never felt too worried heading out there. The walk was like 5 minutes, and I figured it would all go over easy. Again, I wasn't forcing them to leave. I was just there to tell them to put out the fire. After a short walk, I got to the campsite. But it really wasn't a campsite at all. It was just a fire, with no one around it. Worse yet, it was more of a bonfire. Pretty much just some logs stacked up on the ground and lit on fire. Almost like whoever it was using it to get my attention. I called out a few times, but got no responses. I remember starting to get creeped out, shining my flashlight around for a few minutes. The whole forest was quiet though, and it didn't seem like anyone was around. I radioed into Brady, telling him that nobody was around here, and that I thought it might have been some sort of prank to kind of lead me into the woods for no reason. But Brady didn't respond. I radioed again, but it was just static, which in my 9 years of doing this, I'd never not gotten a response. I knew this was not normal. A chill hit my body, and I kicked over the logs and buried the fire, then hurried back through the woods to the lookout station. I was shining the light around frantically, questioning why I even listened to him and went out there. When I made it back, I ran up the stairs, and right when I got to the top, my stomach tightened and my heart started racing. The whole place was ransacked. I had never felt so terrified and fearful in my entire life. I quickly used the main station radio to try contacting Brady again, but with no luck, I then radioed in to authorities that something really weird was going on. I didn't know what to say, but that someone was trespassing and messing with our stuff. I had to make the decision to either stay at the lookout or hike out of there. And even though it was dark, I chose to hike out. I felt like staying, knowing there was no way out if whoever was out there came back, was the more risky option. The hike was a well-defined trail 3 miles down to the ranger station, where Brady was stationed at, and then another mile to the road. I barely packed anything, and quickly left. The whole hour of hurrying through the woods was awful. It was so quiet that every step I made felt like it was giving me away. But I felt relief when I saw the dim lights outside of the ranger station. I called out Brady's name as I approached it, until I noticed the door was wide open. I walked inside, and Brady wasn't there. From the looks of it, he had walked outside for some reason, maybe to check on something he heard, then just vanished. I was out of there within seconds, running to the road and eventually meeting the cops there a few minutes later. They searched a huge perimeter over the next few days. Brady was never found. The whole fire thing was some sort of planned distraction, and I'm assuming they did something near Brady as well to get his attention and get him out of the cabin. Then again, I'm not sure. To be fully transparent, the state kept everything tightly under wraps because this happened in a fairly big touristy park in the state. Back then, I guess it was way easier to keep it all hush. You'd be surprised how often things would just go unheard, let alone when the state didn't want it to be known. That was the year I stopped going there during the summers, and as far as I know, nobody else ever worked at that tower after me. The listing didn't show up any years afterward. Even all these years later, though, I still constantly wonder what really happened that night, and how close I was to going missing just like Brady did.
This is nickname.
ICE with bonuses up to $50,000 and generous benefits. Join.ice.gov.
I used to travel a lot for work, and most of the time I stayed in cheap but decent hotels because I didn't care about anything except having a bed and a shower. Nothing scary ever happened to me in any hotel before, so I never thought about danger or weird people. That changed during a trip I took for a training event in a small city in Pennsylvania. I checked into a regular-looking hotel that had a small lobby with old, depressing red carpet and a smell that reminded me of my grandma's house. The woman at the front desk gave me a room key, and I went up to my room on the 3rd floor. The hallway was very quiet and felt a little empty in a strange way. My room was pretty normal with a small bed, a desk, and a bathroom. I threw my bag on the bed, turned on the TV, and tried to relax. I was tired from driving for hours, so after showering and watching TV for a bit, I tried to fall asleep.
When a child is in the hospital, visitors come to say hello. And when visiting hours are over, they leave. But
I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard something sliding on the floor. At first I thought it was the ice machine or some noise from the hallway. I was half asleep and did not want to get up, but then I heard the soft sliding sound again. And this time it was right by the door. I turned on the lamp and looked at the door. Something small and white was sticking out from underneath. I got up slowly and picked it up. It was a folded piece of paper. There was handwriting inside, very messy and uneven. It was only a few words, telling me that someone was watching me from somewhere inside the hotel. My heart started beating harder because I had no idea who could have written that. I didn't hear any footsteps after the note appeared, and the hallway had been dead silent. I stood in the middle of my room, feeling unsure if I should open the door or stay inside. I decided to lock the chain lock and sit on the bed with my back against the wall. I kept the lamp on so the room would not be so dark. I felt too awake to sleep now. About 20 minutes passed before I heard the sliding sound again. I stared at the bottom of the door, waiting to see what would happen. Another small piece of paper slid through slowly, like someone was gently pushing it with one finger. I walked up to it and picked it up. The second note said something even stranger. It said that person had been inside my room earlier in the day before I arrived, and they liked watching people sleep in this hotel. The handwriting looked shakier than the first note. I felt a wave of fear go through my chest, because the idea that someone had been inside my room was too real to ignore. I looked around the room, even though I knew no one was in there right now. I checked under the bed, inside the closet, and behind the shower curtain, even though I already knew it was empty. After checking everything, I sat on the bed again, trying to decide if I should call the front desk. But it was after 2 a.m., and I had this paranoid feeling that the person sending the notes might be someone who worked at the hotel. The handwriting looked strange and shaky, maybe like an older person or someone who was unstable. I tried to calm myself down, thinking maybe this was some prank, but it felt too personal. I sat still for another half hour and tried to listen for any sound. Every tiny noise made my body tense up. Even the air conditioner clicking or the pipes tapping, everything made me jump. I told myself that if a third note came, I would go straight downstairs. I would not wait any longer. I kept my eyes on the door, but forced myself to breathe slowly. After a long period of silence, I started to relax again. But then, the third note came. The sliding sound was even slower this time, like the person wanted me to hear it. I walked up to the door again. The third note said something completely different from the first two. It said the person was already inside the room with me again. I stared at the words for a long time. I looked around the room again, even though I had checked everything before. I slowly turned in a full circle, expecting to see someone in the corner or behind the curtains. I couldn't even breathe normally now. The idea of someone hiding in the room with me made my chest feel tight. I grabbed my bag and made the decision to get out immediately. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I unlatched the chain lock and opened the door quickly. I rushed out and slammed it behind me, then ran down the hallway trying to stay quiet, but also wanting to get as far from that room as possible. When I reached the stairs, I looked back only once. At the far end of the hallway, I thought I saw a shadow move behind the corner near the last room. It looked like someone stepping back out of sight. I hurried downstairs to the front desk where a different employee was working. He looked half asleep, but when I told him what happened, he looked extremely confused. He said there were only 3 other guests on my floor, and none of them had been walking around. He offered to give me a new room or let me check out early. I decided to check out early and drive to a different hotel, even though it was after 3 a.m. Before leaving, I asked if someone could check my room to see if any windows were open or if anything was disturbed. He took me upstairs with a master key, and when we entered my room, everything looked normal. But the window lock was broken in a way that looked recent. The employee looked nervous and said maybe someone from outside had gotten in earlier. I grabbed my bag and left the moment he finished talking. I drove to a different hotel 20 minutes away and barely slept. The next morning, I called the original hotel to see if they had found anything else. They said nothing strange came up. No cameras caught anyone near my room. No other guests complained about anything. They made it seem like the whole thing was just a weird misunderstanding, but I didn't buy it. I think he was lying. Something strange was going on in that hotel. I still remember the feeling that someone was right outside my door watching me. And the worst part is I keep thinking about the third note saying the person was inside the room again. That's the part that doesn't make sense, and made me question if it was maybe a prank. But the broken window latch said otherwise. I checked everywhere. There was no one. The window latch being broken makes me think that the person might have been coming and going before I ever realized anything was happening. I never went anywhere near that hotel again. I stayed at a hotel in Virginia during a long drive to visit family because I was too tired to keep going. It was late at night, almost midnight, and the hotel looked basic but clean. The parking lot had only a few cars, and most of the building looked dark from the outside. When I walked into the lobby, the man at the front desk barely looked up. He gave me my key and I went to the third floor. Most of the lights were dim, and every door I passed had the "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging, like no one wanted to be bothered. Definitely the type of hotel that people stay at out of necessity only. My room was at the end of the hallway. When I opened the door, the room looked fine, but a little messy in a way I couldn't explain. Like the lamp was tilted, one of the drawers to the dresser was slightly open, the blanket on the bed had a small wrinkle near the corner, as if someone sat there recently. It looked like housekeeping rushed or simply just did not care. I dropped my bag on the chair, turned on the TV, and got ready for bed. I got into bed and tried to sleep, but I kept thinking about how messy the room was when I came in. The more I thought about it, the more weird it seemed. I remembered that the front desk man didn't even mention housekeeping when he checked me in, and the whole hotel felt too empty, but I forced myself to ignore it and finally drifted off. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up to the sound of my doorknob turning slowly. It was such a faint sound at first that I thought maybe the air conditioner made it, but then the handle clicked lightly again, like someone trying to test the lock without waking me. I stared at the door. The room was dark, except for the glow from the TV, which I had forgotten to turn off. I could see the shadow of the door handle move slightly. Someone was outside trying to open it. After a few seconds, the handle stopped moving. I stayed still, waiting for another noise. Then the sound came again, but it was different. It was a small metal scraping against the lock. It sounded like someone sliding a key into the keyhole. But that didn't make sense because no one should have a key to my room besides staff. The key turned, but the door never opened. I could see a thin sliver of hallway light in the gap. The door pushed gently once, then stopped. I waited for a voice or footsteps, but there was nothing. Then the door closed softly again, like the person walked away. I stayed awake for almost an hour, listening for footsteps or any sound in the hall. When nothing happened, I convinced myself it was maybe a staff member who mixed up room numbers, and when they realized, they left. I went to relock the door, then I fell asleep again from exhaustion. Fast forward to like 2:15 a.m., and I remember that specifically. I woke again to something that, at first, I wasn't sure what it was. All I know is I heard the slightest rustling sounds in the room, and I knew someone was in there with me. I was scared to sit up and look, but I did. And then the rustling stopped. I noticed even in the darkness of the room, the slightest sight of a shadowy figure, barely visible in the dark, hovering over my bag in the corner of the room. I said in a panicked, shaky voice, "Who is that?" And a deep man's voice responded, "It's housekeeping. Sorry, I'll leave now." I didn't even respond. I was so shook, but I saw the black mass move from my bag to the door, and then the door opened and closed. I immediately flicked on the light and rushed to the door to put on the chain lock. I went to my bag and saw that it had clearly been gone through. I had to gather myself for a few minutes before calling the front desk. I told them someone with a key just broke into my room and was going through my stuff. The front desk person said that no housekeeping staff was currently there. I packed all my stuff and rushed to the little lobby where I called the police and demanded they check the video surveillance footage. When police arrived, that's when the desk worker agreed to show the surveillance footage, and it showed a large, scary-looking man repeatedly walking down the halls all sketchy-like, going to my door multiple times, and then finally entering my room with a key. The man at the front desk said that the man didn't work there, and he must have somehow stolen a master key from the hotel. I got my money back and immediately fled from that hotel, driving another half hour and eventually sleeping in my car. This experience somewhat permanently tainted my opinion of hotels, unfortunately. I wonder if I could have pressed charges on the hotel for negligence or endangering a guest, or anything like that really, but I never bothered. I just try to block it out now.
Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies. Like how I'm more than just Peyton Manning. I'm also...
I used to work night shifts for a small delivery company, so on my off days I would take short weekend trips alone just to get out of the house. During one of these trips, I stayed at a cheap hotel in New Jersey because it was close to a hiking trail I wanted to check out the next morning. The hotel wasn't terrible, but it had that old smell, and the hallways were too quiet, like no one else was staying there. I checked in during the early evening, and the woman at the front desk told me housekeeping had already cleaned all the rooms for the night. I didn't think about that detail until later when everything unfolded. My room was on the second floor, and the hallway light flickered when I walked to my door. I didn't pay much mind to how creepy the hotel was because I was just so tired. I wanted to eat, shower, and go to sleep. The room looked clean at first glance. The sheets were tucked in perfectly, but the pillow on the chair looked a little crooked. I fixed it without thinking and turned on the small TV. After relaxing for a bit and eating snacks, I got in the shower. When I came out, the bathroom mirror was foggy and the room felt colder than before. I brushed it off and got into bed. The room had a dark corner near the small closet, and I kept noticing it out of the corner of my eye. It made me feel like someone was standing there, even though I knew it was empty. I fell asleep eventually, but I woke up sometime after midnight because I heard a strange, soft noise. It sounded like something sliding on the carpet in the corner of the room. I opened my eyes slowly and listened. The room was dim because the curtains were thin and some light from the parking lot came through. I thought maybe I was imagining things because I was still half asleep. Then I heard a quiet breathing sound, not mine, and it was coming from near the closet. I stayed completely still because I got scared instantly. The breathing was slow, like someone trying to stay quiet but struggling. I told myself it had to be the air conditioner, but the unit was on the other side of the room, and it made a totally different sound. I didn't want to sit up because I was afraid of what I might see, but eventually I forced myself to. I slowly pushed myself up on my elbows and looked toward the closet. I couldn't see anything at first, it was just a dark corner. But then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The closet door, which I knew I had left completely open after checking it earlier, was now slightly closed. Not fully, but enough that it looked touched. I stared at the gap and tried to listen. The breathing stopped the second I sat up, and that made me even more scared because it meant something or someone realized I was awake. I wanted to run out of the room, but I was frozen in place. After a minute of silence, I got up very slowly and walked backward toward the door while keeping my eyes on the closet. I reached for the doorknob, turned it carefully, and stepped into the hallway. The hallway was empty and felt even quieter than before. My heart was beating so fast I felt lightheaded. I went downstairs to the front desk, but no one was there. The desk phone was ringing like someone called the hotel, but no one picked up. I didn't know if I should wait or try to find someone else. I didn't want to go back upstairs alone. After a few minutes, the woman who worked the front desk finally came out of the back room looking tired. I told her someone was in my room. She looked confused and said housekeeping was gone for the night, and no one else had keys to guest rooms except for her and one older housekeeper who left hours ago. She offered to check the room with me or move to another, but she seemed so calm that it made me doubt myself a little. I asked her to come with me back to the room just to check. We went upstairs together. I expected to see the closet wide open or something messed up, but when we entered the room, everything looked normal. The closet was fully open again. The pillow on the chair was straight. Nothing seemed touched, even though I knew something had changed earlier. The woman checked behind the curtains and in the bathroom and under the bed, and she found nothing. She said maybe I had a nightmare or woke up confused, and honestly this kind of offended me, but I didn't want to argue with her because I was tired and embarrassed, so I decided to switch to another room down the hall. She gave me a different key and left me alone. I moved my stuff to the new room quickly and locked the door. I checked every corner twice before lying down again. I tried to sleep, but the fear kept my eyes open. It was only around 1 a.m. and the night felt never-ending. I kept listening for anything strange. After about an hour, I finally started drifting off when I heard something that made my entire body turn cold. It was the sound of a housekeeping cart rolling down the hallway very slowly. The squeaky wheels echoed down the hall. The problem was that it was way past housekeeping hours, and the woman at the front desk said no one else was working. I sat up in bed and listened. The cart's wheels stopped right outside my new door. I didn't move. I held my breath for a bit so I could listen. Then I heard something worse. I heard someone else breathing right outside the door, and it sounded exactly like the heavy, slow breathing I heard from inside the first room. It went on for almost a full minute. I wanted to run or call someone, but my phone was across the room on the desk and I was too scared to move. Then I heard a gentle knocking sound. Not with knuckles, but like someone pressing their palm against the door softly. They were feeling the door, not knocking. Eventually the breathing stopped and the wheels squeaked again as the cart was pushed slowly down the hallway. I got up after a few minutes and looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. The cart was gone too. I checked my phone and thought about calling the front desk again, but I felt like they would think I was crazy. I locked the chain on the door, pushed the chair against it, and sat awake for hours. I kept thinking about the first room and the breathing. I tried to convince myself it was just someone on my floor messing around. Early in the morning around sunrise, I finally left the room and went downstairs to check out. The woman at the desk was gone, and a man was there instead. I told him what happened, and he gave me a strange look. Then he said something that disturbs me to this day. He said they had not had a housekeeper on staff for the last week because the woman who used to work nights just stopped coming in. He explained that either he or whoever else was on front desk duty would have to clean the rooms in the meantime. He seems like there was something he was hiding from me to save face for the hotel. I asked him if the missing housekeeper had keys to the rooms, and he said yes, she did. I left immediately after and did not look back at the hotel. I kept thinking about how that woman at the desk said housekeeping had already been through all the rooms earlier that evening, even though no one had been hired for a week. I don't know if she made that up or if she actually thought the missing woman had done it, but the breathing I heard in the room and outside my door sounded too real, and the way the closet door moved on its own still makes me feel sick. I think someone had been hiding inside that room before I ever arrived. I think they were still hiding somewhere in the hotel while I slept. I work as a house person at a hotel. It's a mix of maintenance and housekeeping. My job is to mostly help the front desk, which mainly involves me fixing guests' appliances and bringing them supplies. Another one of my jobs is to keep our pool clean and stashed with towels, which is relevant to the story I'm about to share. This took place in summer of 2023. My boss hired a new front desk worker, which for privacy reasons, I'll call her Brianna. She was working the night shifts, so I had a schedule change to help her on nights. It was a Wednesday night, so for our hotel, means it was a dead night, basically no check-ins. Me and Brianna mostly just chatted for the night while we did our stuff, which led to me going to our pool. For a guest here, if you wanted to go swimming, you had to fill out a form which basically gives you all the rules, and you'll be handed a pool key. Our managers gave us employees master keys that can get you into basically anything in the hotel. I clicked the key onto the lock and the pool door unlocked, allowing me to head in. The pool has a storage room, which we stash towels and also other stuff like chlorine and whatnot. I opened the storage room and grabbed towels, since I saw there was little to none on the rack. As I was bending down to grab one more towel, I heard something hit the water. I actually jumped because it startled the hell out of me, and it caused me to drop the towels. I rushed out back to the pool area and saw one of our lifesavers floating on top of the water. It was so bizarre because there was no way this lifesaver could have been in the water without having been tossed into the pool. I looked around the pool to see if someone had entered, but there was no one in here except for me. I pulled in the lifesaver out of the pool and quickly got back to putting towels out and left. I was weirded out for sure. I asked Brianna, who was at the front desk, if anyone went to the pool, and of course she said no. I didn't want to bring up the weird incident that happened since she was new and I wanted to give her a good impression of not sounding delusional. The night went on and nothing happened until around 9:30 p.m. I grabbed a maintenance slip and read what the problem was. Room 324's toilet wasn't working. I trotted my way up to room 324 and let myself in with the key. When you open the door, immediately to the right is the bathroom. If you walk straight past the bathroom, you'll find 2 beds on the right side of the room. I headed right towards the toilet and lifted the lid up to fix it. There was no one in the room since Brianna told me the guest wasn't arriving until Friday. While I was adjusting the valves and flapper inside of the toilet to see what wasn't working, I felt the temperature all of a sudden drop. I stopped what I was doing and stood there, feeling the hairs on my arms slowly raising up. What the hell? I said in my head as I looked at all the vents that could possibly be letting cold air in. Then I realized there could be no cold air. It was a summer night, a warm summer night to be specific. So what the hell could make the temperature just drop? As soon as I had this thought, I felt the air return to normal, and my hairs went back down. I checked the thermostat in the room, and it read 68 degrees. This put me more on edge now, since I hadn't forgotten the pool incident. I wanted to fix the toilet and get out of here, so I went back into the bathroom and back to fixing the toilet. It felt like 2 minutes went by, because I heard the toilet start to flush again. I sighed out of relief, and watched the water in the tank rise back up. When over the sound of the water, there was an audibly loud thump coming from somewhere outside the bathroom. I froze in place. And then, that all too familiar cold feeling coming back. My heart started to race as my mind started to race at what could have made that noise. I put the lid back on top of the toilet and made my way out of the bathroom. I turned my head right to face the 2 beds and saw the room phone on the nightstand dangling. However, I wasn't paying attention to the phone dangling. I was paying attention to what I saw past the phone. In the corner of the room, right next to the bed, there was a really tall person, standing still as ever. I felt myself struggling to breathe with what I was looking at. I was frozen stiff in the doorway of the bathroom. I couldn't see any features on this person. It was just this completely black figure in the dim room, like a character outline when you unlock them in a fighting game. It stood so still I couldn't hear any noise emit from it. Then, I swear to God, he, she, it, whatever, moved. I don't know which limb moved, but all I know is I saw this figure move. I practically bolted for the main door, flinging it open so fast I almost smacked myself in the face. I closed the door and rushed back down to the first floor where Brianna was at the front desk. I told her that I was punching out, and we said our farewells for the night. While driving home, I was wrapped in my head, trying to figure out what just happened to me. I connected the pool incident to the room incident. I had no idea what that thing was in my room. And yes, I say thing now because I realized that couldn't be any human I know, and how I couldn't read a single feature of it. It was enough for me to get out of there. I like to think my mind was just playing tricks on me, but I have no way of knowing for sure. Nothing weird like this has happened to me since, which I'm thankful for, because that was the scariest night of my life.
I always had dreams of being a big city cop. Growing up watching shows like Forensic Files and NYPD Blue inspired me. I dreamed of becoming a hero who fought crime to protect people, but I guess fate had other ideas. Rather than patrolling the streets of Brooklyn or Chicago, I somehow wound up in a small town in the rural Midwest. Nothing but dirt, tumbleweeds, and flat land as far as the eye could see. Some comedian once made a joke about his time living out here, saying that he could sit on his porch and watch his dog run away for 3 whole days. His name escapes me now, but that joke is surprisingly accurate. Because of everything that has happened recently, I won't be giving the name of this town. There's a lot I still don't understand about what happened, but I know my superiors wouldn't be happy if I went around blabbing about and spreading rumors. Posting this at all is probably a bad idea, but at this point, I don't know what else to do. After landing the job out here, it quickly became apparent that there wasn't much action, and that was the norm, but that all changed about a week ago. A fellow officer, I'll call Doug, and I were on our usual patrol route. This normally consisted of us cruising around town and the rural surrounding roads, and occasionally breaking up a high school party. Not exactly the hotbed of criminal activity that I had sort of hoped for. Doug is a senior officer and been working for the same precinct out here for nearly 30 years. He's a laid-back type, cordial, and doesn't seem in much of a hurry to do anything, except in the rare occasion of something happening. The sun was beginning to set in the distance, and Doug was retelling the incident of him facing off with a hungry cougar while trying to help an injured camper. That was a normal evening for us, and I very much enjoyed listening to him recount tales from his pantheon of stories. Doug pulled the cruiser around a bend in what is essentially the most remote patch of our jurisdiction. It's a small valley with multiple foothills, but no one ever really goes out there. As soon as we rounded the corner, though, we saw something that we didn't expect. There was a Jeep parked on the shoulder right in front of a hill with the driver's side door propped open. Our headlights beamed over the vehicle, but I saw nobody inside. "And the hell is this?" Doug asked, pulling our car over on the adjacent shoulder. The two of us stepped out and approached the desolate vehicle. The lights were off, but it appeared it had only been there a short time. It was weird that whoever drove it there hadn't even bothered to shut the door, though. And Doug and I approached, with him taking the lead and approaching the derelict vehicle. He called out to the missing driver but got no response. He kept his hand on his holster and crept closer as I watched his back. There was no indication that anyone was out there aside from the Jeep, but I felt the hairs on the back of my neck bristle. Something wasn't right. I truly hoped we weren't about to stumble upon somebody's suicide, but that was the vibe that I initially got. Doug reached the side of the Jeep and briefly peered inside. As soon as he saw what was in there, he recoiled back, drawing his revolver and motioning for me to move away. He ordered me to call in backup, looking more frantic than I had ever seen him. "Tell them to send everyone," Doug ordered, his gaze glancing around the vicinity with a sudden frenzy. I did as he requested, and I radioed dispatch, still not understanding what exactly it was that he saw. The dispatch operator confirmed the request, telling me that 2 other units and an ambulance were on the way. "Freeze!" Doug suddenly shouted. I looked up to see him shining his flashlight out in front of the Jeep. There was a man there dressed in a dark hoodie and jeans. He was holding something in his hand, but from my vantage point, I couldn't tell what it was. Johnny, is that you?" Doug asked, seeming to recognize him. The man then lifted his head, and I recognized him. A local teenager, a native guy with a bit of a checkered history. We've caught him for underage drinking and smoking pot on a few occasions, but never anything severe. Johnny's eyes were vacant, almost sorrowful. He stared back at Doug and he swallowed hard. "I have to do it," Johnny replied. Doug shook his head, almost silently begging him not to try anything radical. "Johnny, just put it down. We can talk, figure this out," Johnny paused a moment and then shook his head. He inspected the item in his hand and I realized it was a walkie-talkie. I didn't understand what was happening, but I kept my pistol locked on him. "There's no time. I'm sorry." Johnny lifted his arm. Bang. The ambulance arrived on scene a few minutes later, picking up Johnny and rushing him to the town's only hospital. Doug had shot him in the left shoulder, causing him to drop his item. He was thankfully alive and stable, but unfortunately, Doug doesn't carry the standard 9mm. Instead, patrolling around with his revolver 44 Magnum. That one bullet did some rather severe damage, and I still didn't understand why any of it was necessary. Doug ordered all of us away from the scene, refusing to allow anyone near the Jeep or even telling us what he found inside. Several hours later, a special unit from a larger neighboring precinct had arrived. Things finally started coming together after that. Johnny's Jeep was loaded with nearly 30 pounds of pyrotechnic flash powder, the stuff used in fireworks. He had crammed it into nearly 24 small cylinders and wrapped them tightly with 2 propane tanks into walkie-talkie. It was a bomb, and a rather large one which he had rigged to the other walkie-talkie to allow for remote detonation. Johnny's father owns a fireworks chain, and after scouting his warehouse, we found that's where Johnny had acquired his supplies. Johnny was a rebellious teenager, but I never thought he would do something like this. The bomb squad managed to successfully dismantle his device without incident, but the whole scenario still didn't make much sense. Johnny was unconscious for days afterwards, and the .44 round that had hit him turned out to have caused more damage than initially thought. Doctors said that he would survive, but would face extensive recovery. Doug took the incident harder than any of us, but since our suspect was unconscious, the only thing we could do to learn more was to return to the scene of the crime. The Jeep had been removed by then, so myself, Doug, and 2 other officers had traced his route on foot. There was a small valley which led into a few rocky foothills, but no indication of a possible target. No one lives in that area, nor anywhere close really. That was partially revealing, as we were afraid Johnny was intending to hurt a lot of people, but that didn't seem to be the case. After only a few minutes of following the small ravine, we found something. A narrow opening was carved into the side of one of the hills, looking as though it was an old mining tunnel entrance. Upon closer inspection, I realized that it wasn't just caved in. It actually appeared as though a large stone slab had sealed the entrance. It was one solid piece and not just rubble. I found that quite curious, but I didn't exactly know what to make of it. The town had dozens of old mines from the early gold rush days, but they've all been shut down for decades now. Furthermore, we haven't been able to find any evidence of a mine ever existing in that particular spot. I got this odd feeling as we had approached it, like a heavy static electricity in the air. The hairs on my arms and head seemed to stand up, and I noticed it on the others as well. Normally, this can be a very worrying sign and can sometimes indicate that lightning is about to strike. The sky was clear though, and that didn't seem likely. Something about it was oddly unnerving in a way I don't know how to fully articulate. We lingered there for a few minutes, but didn't find much of interest there or anywhere else. We left shortly after, and took the short trail back to our vehicles. I don't know whether it was just my nerves mounting, but I felt incredibly nervous on my way back. It felt like we were being watched. Johnny thankfully woke up 2 days later, and Doug and I returned to the hospital to question him. He was still quite out of it, likely a reaction to his medication and condition. His father was there, and at first he denied us permission to interview his son, until Johnny himself insisted upon speaking to us. Both his father and us were quite taken aback by that request, but we were all too happy to oblige. "Where's my Jeep?" Johnny asked as Doug and I had entered the room. "Impound. Bomb squad dismantled it," Doug replied matter-of-factly. He sat in a chair opposing Johnny, who appeared quite distressed by the admission. "We have to go back out there, there's not much time." Johnny then tried moving upward, but cringed as pain shot through his shoulder. He gritted his teeth and reluctantly sat back down, breaths falling frantic from his lips. "You're not going anywhere, Johnny, not until you tell us what you were doing. You could be in a lot of trouble here. I mean, what were you doing with all those explosives?" "The tunnel," he replied without a moment's hesitation, making no effort to downplay his intent. "We have to destroy it." Doug shot me a confused glance, and I posed a question. "That mine shaft, is that what you mean?" Johnny shook his head. "No, it's not a mine shaft." Johnny's eyes were almost frantic then, and his breathing almost turned to hyperventilations. "You've been out there, right? You saw it?" he asked. "We found it, Johnny. It's already sealed." Johnny then vehemently shook his head. "It won't stay that way. It opens every couple of days." Doug and I exchanged another perturbed glance. I'm sure he wanted to write off Johnny as some sort of eccentric, but there was an obvious desperate pleading in his voice that made me take pause. "Oh, please," Johnny begged, eyes starting to water. "Why, Johnny?" I asked, leaning in. "What's in there?" Doug seemed annoyed that I was even engaging his delusion, but Johnny was clearly petrified by something, and I wanted to know what it was. "I don't know, something horrible. I've seen people post about them online. We have to destroy it." We didn't get much more out of him than that. He just kept begging us to finish what he wasn't able to do. He also said something about how things will come out, which made my skin crawl. I didn't understand how a normal kid like Johnny had suddenly become so obsessed with detonating an old tunnel, but I couldn't deny the odd feeling that it gave me, and the pleading desperation in his voice. Doug and I laughed, realizing that he wasn't going to tell us much more than that. After a bit of math, I realized that if what Johnny had said was true, then the mine shaft was set to open the following morning around 3 a.m. Doug believed it was a load of hogwash, but I felt that the least I could do was investigate Johnny's claims. It didn't seem possible, I know, and Doug told me that I was being thrown for a loop, but I felt like there was something more to it. Johnny was a troubled kid, as I have mentioned, but he didn't seem like a liar.
Inflation is nothing more than legalized theft. Hi, I'm Dr. Ron Paul, and to preserve your wealth,
So myself and two other officers, Hastings and Gunnarsson, returned to the scene of the incident, and Doug elected to stay behind, convinced there was nothing of interest out there. It probably had something to do with the fact that we had to be out there by 3 a.m. as well, and Doug was not in any way a morning person. According to Johnny, 3 a.m. the following day was when the tunnel was set to open once again, whatever that meant. I thought that whatever this was, there would be a logical explanation to it. I met Hastings and Gunnarsson out there just before 3 a.m. the following morning. Both of them only seemed slightly awake and also slightly remorseful over their decision to meet me. A thick fog lingered over the foothills, sprinkling a chilly dew over the environment. I tucked my coat up around my neck, trying to ignore the chills rolling down my spine. The three of us sat around sipping coffee for about half an hour until 3 a.m. had rolled around. Suddenly an odd, abrasive noise permeated the dark atmosphere. It sounded like heavy rock scraping against rock, a loud, oppressive grinding that made me clench my teeth. It sounded like it was coming from the ravine up ahead, and it made the cold air dip a few more degrees. Hastings and Gunnarsson clearly seemed unnerved by it as well. Gunnarsson wondered aloud whether it was a rock slide, but I wasn't so sure the explanation was that simple. The three of us crept our way around the gully. It seemed like the fog was getting thicker the further we went. It got so bad that visibility was soon limited to maybe 20 yards. Something's not right. Hastings spoke what I was also feeling. There was an odd quality to the fog, like some ill-defined heaviness that lingered within it. It didn't feel natural. Despite the red flags, I foolishly insisted that we continue onward. We were only about 50 yards from the tunnel entrance, and I needed to see it again. Something incredibly strange happened then. What I can only describe as a sudden head rush then struck me, like my brain had been jump-started into overdrive. My vision began to alter in a way that I don't even fully know how to explain. It was like my perception just suddenly shifted. Little tracers trailed off the rocks around me, and the ground appeared like it was breathing in and out. Now, I'm pretty vanilla when it comes to drug usage, and although I've never taken them personally, it almost felt like what I was experiencing was similar to accounts of mushrooms and LSD trips that I've read online. Out of nowhere, Hastings suddenly began to giggle. Both Gunnarsson and I looked back to him in confusion. His eyes were darting around like flies, and he had this little manic smile on his face. "The hell is so funny?" And Gunnarsson's eyes were wide as saucers when he had asked it, and I could tell that he was feeling it too. "I feel weird. What did you put in that coffee?" Hastings asked. Needless to say, I hadn't put anything in the coffee, especially not hallucinogenic drugs. There was something in the air itself that was messing with our minds. I then decided to go all out, and I made a mad dash towards the tunnel. The feeling got worse the closer I got. The world degraded to a foreign slurry in my eyes, and the rocky ground became as turbulent as an unruly sea. I could barely keep myself upright, and barely even decipher what was around me. Then, by some miracle, I saw it. The tunnel emerged from the dense fog, but this time the entrance was open. From behind me, I heard Hastings' giggles erupt into a bellow of laughter, like a mad scientist bringing Frankenstein back to life. Gunnarsson then screamed, and I just booked it. I took one last glance at the tunnel as I fled, and I swear there was something in there looking back at me. Something that I don't even know how to begin describing. Something that just shouldn't exist. I ran like never before in my life, suddenly consumed by the fear that I felt. Both Gunnarsson and Hastings were no longer where I had last seen them. From further within the canopy of fog, I heard Hastings continue to cackle like a madman, but I never caught sight of him. The crippling mental haze seemed to alleviate the further that I got from the tunnel, and by the time that I reached the vehicles, I felt completely coherent once more. Gunnarsson was standing there panting with quivering hands. "Where's Hastings?" I asked as I joined him. Gunnarsson looked back to me in terror. "He followed after you." From behind us, I saw the fog slowly drifting outwards, as if it were some singular entity drifting in the wind. I no longer heard Hastings' laughter, and I knew that if we didn't leave then we wouldn't at all. Gunnarsson and I fled, leaving Hastings behind. I called Doug on the way, trying to convey everything that had just happened. I don't know how much he understood from my frantic rant mixed with his sudden awakening, but he seemed to understand that Hastings was in trouble. He and I rendezvoused at the station about 20 minutes later, and I reiterated the account above. Doug didn't seem to know what to make of my story, but he did understand that Hastings was missing. He rallied everybody in the police force to go back and search, albeit Gunnarsson, who vehemently refused to go back. He and Doug got into a heated argument about it, and Gunnarsson tossed his badge into the dirt, claiming that no job was worth going back there, before storming off. I'll admit that I was absolutely terrified of going back, but I knew that we had to help Hastings. It was my fault that he was out there to begin with, and I had to do my part. It turns out that it may have been too late, as by the time that Doug and I returned with reinforcements, we found no trace of him. The fog was gone by that point too, and the tunnel sealed back up, just as it was the first time that we had found it. And Doug began to amass a search team and ordered me to go home and get some rest and decompress from the situation. My girlfriend Samantha could see that something had happened, but I didn't tell her about it. I think the adrenaline had finally worn off, and I felt a severe drowsiness setting in. Last thing I remember was slumping on the couch of our apartment, only to be awakened several hours later by Samantha shaking me vigorously. "Mark, something's happening. Wake up. I feel really weird." As my eyes sprung open, I saw the room distort around me similar to how it had previously. That unnerving mental haze was back, and that could only mean one thing. She and I got our dog Max as our perceptions continued to disintegrate, and we fled. Max was going ballistic all the way out to the car, switching from snarling like he had gone rabid to whining pitifully. It was dark again, and from all around us, I could hear laughter and cries from the other residents in our complex. I wanted to help them, but in the moment, I only cared about getting Samantha and Max to safety. By the time we reached Samantha's car, there were screams echoing out from within the complex. Other residents were fleeing as well, but many were still inside. By the time we hit the main street, the town's tornado siren had begun blaring in the distance. Samantha asked me what the hell was going on, but I didn't even know how to respond. I dialed Doug, and he instructed me to meet him at the station with a trembling urgency in his voice. We got there only a few minutes later, and I told Samantha to take the car and Max and get to safety. She had tears in her eyes and asked me what was going on, but I didn't have time to tell her then. I just told her that I loved her and that I would call her as soon as I could. She agreed, and I watched her drive off as I returned to the moment at hand. Doug rallied every officer at our precinct, which was only 9 of us because the town is so small, and sent them back to the apartments. Only Hastings was missing, but the rest arrived shortly after we did. Doug had said that dispatch had been flooded with 911 calls from multiple residents of the complex. I felt the horrific guilt of the situation sink deep into my skull, causing my mind to throb. Everything in my mind and gut was screaming for me to get as far away from that place as possible, but I couldn't. I couldn't just abandon everyone who lived there. After all, whatever was happening there, it was happening because of me. That thing had come back for me. Several people were in the parking lot as we arrived. They appeared delirious and confused, with most of them in their pajamas as if they had had to leave very quickly. Doug ordered all of them away from the building as we began to conduct interviews and ask if anybody was injured. I spoke with an elderly lady, Martha, who had lived in the unit below Samantha and mine ever since we had moved in. She was all but petrified and clutched her Palmarian tightly in her hands. Her nose was bleeding, but thankfully she didn't appear too badly injured. I spoke with her as she held a rag to her nose, tears falling faster from her eyes with every word. She told me she had suddenly been awakened by a strange feeling. She felt woozy, and since she's diabetic, she thought perhaps her insulin levels were low. But then she saw her husband sitting in their bedroom closet and giggling. She stumbled towards him, calling out and expressing her fears that she may be having a medical emergency. Without warning, she said that her husband, Frank, suddenly lashed out and slapped her across the face. He then returned to the closet, holding his knees and giggling. Martha fled after that, and that decision probably saved her life. She began sobbing, saying that Frank had never done anything like that, and she was worried that he might be sick. I've conversed with Frank myself dozens of times, and he never would have struck me as the type of guy to do that. She told me that he was still inside and begged me to go and check on him. Doug got on a speaker and instructed everyone to leave the complex immediately. We were worried that the building may have sprung a gas leak, which could have possibly explained Martha and the other residents' symptoms, but it was clearly far beyond that. Not a single person came outside. There's only maybe 50 residents in our entire complex, and most of them were already outside, although we estimated that at least a dozen were still within. 2 of our officers approached one of the entrances as the remainder of us covered them. I watched their steps grow more hobbled and awkward the closer they got, until one of them actually fell over entirely, propping himself up with his arm. He then heaved and vomited on the concrete, and turned back as the other officer tried pulling him back to his feet. The 2 of them managed to get back to the rest of us, brandishing looks of terror reminiscent of the other residents. No one went near the building after that, and no one else came out. It was just a stalemate that went on long into the night. Doug kept on the intercom, periodically instructing people to evacuate, but no one ever did. The other residents were ferried away from the scene, with many of them being forced to abandon their loved ones still inside. Every now and then we would hear laughter, screaming, or other less definable sounds reverberate from inside the building. We got glimpses of silhouettes within, but never anything entirely clear. No one really understood what was going on, but after the first officer's experiences and the other residents' testimonies, no one wanted to risk going in there. The sun finally rose the following day, and the real bizarre situation took on an entirely new perspective. It had been hours since anything was heard from within the building, but something became clear as the smoldering sun beamed down upon it. The building itself was different. Some spots looked almost melted, while others seemed to have elongated and grown taller or wider. It's like the building itself was suffering from the odd haze that had afflicted myself and the other residents. Not long after the sun had risen, an entourage of black Suburbans suddenly rolled up to the scene, followed soon after by a SWAT truck. Like some cliché entourage, a group of men in black suits exited the trucks and approached Doug. They spent a minute or two conversing before Doug looked back to the rest of us. Much to my surprise and relief, we were then told that we could leave and that the men in black would handle the situation. By that point, I had been up for nearly 24 hours and I wanted nothing more than to just sleep. I probably should have asked a few more questions before leaving, but I was barely awake enough to even remain standing by that point. I assumed those guys were CIA or from some other secret government agency, but I haven't been able to confirm that. That was about a week ago now, and as of writing this, that's about where we stand. I haven't been able to return back to my apartment since, and I have since been told by Doug that I likely never will. They're considering that entire property and the 11 individuals still inside to be already lost. And Doug hasn't told me much more than that, and I don't even know if they've told him the full extent of what's happening. Clearly, whatever is in that building is significantly above our jurisdiction. The ravine with the tunnel is also now under the supervision of the unnamed government agents. I never would have imagined myself at the epicenter of something like this. I guess in some cruel twist of irony, I finally got the large-scale case that I always wanted, but I never could have envisioned it being like this. Whatever it was that was in that tunnel and is now in that building, it's way beyond us. I want to think there's some logical explanation to this, like some gas leak in the mine caused me to hallucinate and then somehow spread to our apartment complex. I'd be a fool to believe that after everything that's happened though. Whatever happened to me and the others, it wasn't in any way natural. It was like that thing invaded my mind in proximity to its strength and the strange psychic aura that it possesses. Whatever power it has even seemed to distort the building itself. I never got a good look at it, but what kind of thing could warp your mind simply by being near it? Just as Johnny had said, I've managed to find a few stories online of people finding these tunnels. I don't know how much I read was fiction, but no one seems to have an explanation for them. People just apparently seem to stumble across them one day, oftentimes in places they hadn't been before. If anyone reading has a possible explanation for all of this, then please feel free to comment. I'm at a loss to explain this, and I'll admit, I've never been much of a believer in the whole supernatural stuff. Nothing I've found online seems to explain what that thing is, natural or otherwise. Hastings is still missing, and last I heard those people are still locked inside that building. Whatever the truth is, I just hope that no more of those tunnels are out there. God knows what kind of things may come out of them.
gifts for the outdoors and the outdoorsy. Eddie Bauer.
One of the best things about Patient First Urgent and Primary Care is the friendly expert care you get from
I bought my first house that I currently still live in 2 years ago. I was in the unpacking and settling in phase. At the time, I was single and living alone, but I just figured it was time for a house. I had a couple friends over to help me unload the truck full of boxes, and I paid them with food since they wouldn't accept money. They hung around for a few hours after just to hang out. When my friend Dale went to the bathroom, he came back and said he heard some noises from inside the walls, and that it sounded like there were some pipe issues. I took note of it, and the two of them left a little later. Since it was a Saturday, I stayed up pretty late on my laptop watching Netflix. However, I was hearing some light thumping sounds from above me, which was odd because my bedroom is upstairs. The only thing that could be above me would be the attic. Then I remembered Dale's comments about the noises from inside the walls. I went to the attic door and pulled it down, and I actually had to take a deep breath because I was a bit nervous. I climbed the stairs into the attic and pulled the light switch down. One very dim yellow light buzzed on, just barely lighting up the attic. The noises in the walls stopped though. Either that or the noises just weren't coming from the attic, I imagined. With no boxes up there yet, it was just basically a big empty space, and I could clearly see no one was up there. The only things in the entire attic were a couple giant framed paintings leaning on one of the walls. I went back down to my room and tried to get some sleep, but I heard the noises again. Now I started to fear there was a small animal on the walls, like a raccoon. The sound still seemed to be coming from directly above my room. It had to be in the attic. So once more, I went up into the attic and looked to where I thought would be directly above my bedroom. The thing is, the attic didn't seem to extend the entire length of the house, so there's a wall covering where the section above my room should be. I walked over to the wall just to listen for potential noises, and I did hear noises from the other side of this wall. Then I looked at the two paintings leaning on the wall, how they were slightly angled. My heart started to race. I walked to the paintings and slightly angled one upwards off the wall, revealing a big hole in the wall. It took a few seconds for the reality to sink in. As I held the painting at an upright position, the painting was suddenly pushed out of my grip to fall flat on the floor. I nearly had a heart attack. Out from the hole came this sickly-looking girl. She seemed to be high on something. She was shaking, making weird noises, and she would start this creepy laughing. She grabbed onto me and dug her nails into my shoulders so hard I screamed, and I pushed her as hard as I could off of me. She fell backwards into the secret room, and I ran to the exit and shut the attic door behind me. I locked myself in my room as I called the police and reported that a crazy, dangerous person was in my attic. Cops arrived within 5 minutes. 3 cop cars ended up pulling up, and there were a total of 5 police officers in my house. 4 of them went into the attic, and I heard the struggle. The girl screamed like a creature, and it sounded like she was trying to attack the officers, which led to her getting tased. They finally managed to get her in cuffs and carry her out of the attic and outside to one of the cars. The girl had to be like anywhere from 25 to 35 years old, but like I said, she looked sickly. While the officers were still in the house, I went into the attic to examine the secret room. Inside was a pile of blankets, a dirty pillow, a lot of food wrappers, and human waste in one corner. It seemed as though this girl had been up there for a long time. It was truly a nightmare to discover this on my first night in my new house. The girl was taken to a nearby psychiatric center to get her the help she needed. My dad helped me buy my first house when I was 28. I was never spoiled, but my dad always had a lot of money, and when I wanted a house, he lent me a large amount of cash. The previous owners of the house were an elderly couple. As far as I know, the husband died many years before I moved in. The wife died just a few weeks before I bought the house. The son of the couple who sold me the house kept a lot of the furniture in the house for me, and he took only what he really needed or wanted, which made things easier for me, less furniture to buy. I did dump some of the more outdated stuff on the curb though, including this old rocking chair that was sitting in the living room. A lot of the furniture just had an older, creepy vibe that I didn't want in the house. The next day, I was cleaning out more junk in the upstairs section of the house for most of the day. A lot of it was heavy lifting, so I'd take breaks in between, and this ate up most of the day. I didn't really get an ounce of sleep the night before, as I have a mild form of insomnia which affects me certain nights. That second night, having moved into the house, I went out to get some Chinese for dinner because I had no energy to cook. When I got back, I was disturbed to find the front door was unlocked. Now, I truly don't remember if I had simply forgotten to lock it or not. I wanted to believe I forgot, but it just seemed so unlikely I'd forget to do that, especially with my brand new house. I started flicking on every light of every room on the main floor. The more light, the safer I'd feel. I then proceeded up the stairs to do the same there, in the common area and in all 3 bedrooms. There was also a basement to the house that I'd only been down inside once at that point. It was not a big basement like you would expect though. It was kind of just a small storage space where the washer and dryer happened to be. I was already feeling a lot more confident that I had just simply forgotten to lock the door, but I still had to check the basement before I could confirm this. I opened the basement door and I flicked on the light. As I got halfway down the stairs, I saw an old rocking chair sitting in the middle of the basement. I didn't remember it being there the first time I saw the basement, and when I stood over it, I could swear it was the same rocking chair I had thrown away the night before. If not the same one, at least an identical one. I looked around the basement though, and there wasn't anyone down there, so I did calm down just a bit. I headed back upstairs to eat my Chinese food. I remember leaving the basement door cracked open though, which sat right next to the kitchen, and I started hearing rickety, creaking sounds from downstairs. I ran to the basement door and I tried to turn on the light, but it wouldn't turn on this time. All I could think was, what the hell was that noise? I went to the kitchen to grab my flashlight from under the sink, and I went a quarter of the way down the stairs with the flashlight beaming down to the bottom, and I saw the rocking chair moving, and someone was sitting in it. It was an old woman with gray, curly hair, glasses, and she was dressed in a pink nightgown. Her head slowly turned to be looking up at me. I gasped and left the basement, closing the door this time. I don't know what I was immediately thinking at that point. All I knew was I had to call the police. But when they came, they searched the whole basement with me, and we didn't find anyone. There were also no hidden compartments or exits down there where she could have escaped through. At a certain point, the cops started looking at me like I was crazy, I knew it, and pretty soon they left. I had the contact details of the son of the couple who owned the house before me, so I called him up around 8 or 9 p.m. and described the lady to the best of my ability. He sounded shook and started to cry over the phone, and said I just perfectly described his mother and her favorite nightgown. He said he'd be right over. He got to the house within the hour, and we went downstairs together. He seemed to be in shock the whole time. I could see his hands shaking. He ended up leaving with the rocking chair after a while of talking with me and being very emotional. It may have been emotional for him, but it was the scariest thing I could have possibly ever witnessed with my own eyes. It still stands to be. I kept the basement door locked 24/7 after that, and I'd be scared to do laundry for months. But after half a year of nothing happening, it wasn't that bad. I only lived in that house a year and a half, though. When I was 12 years old, my family moved to a new house in the countryside of Louisiana, located near a small village. We'd always lived in rural areas, definitely grew up unfamiliar to the city lifestyle or anything even remotely close to that. The property was 3 acres and very private. On the second night at that house, our dog Parker, who would sleep in my room, started barking and growling in the middle of the night. When he saw that I sat up in my bed, his tail started wagging, but he'd continue to bark and growl. I couldn't tell what he was looking at though, he was just looking towards the corner of the room. I checked the closet and nothing. So I told Parker to shut up, and he did. but I did keep hearing him lift his head off his bed every once in a while, reacting to something. The next day, an older man came and knocked on the front door. My dad answered while I was in the living room watching cartoons. I heard the whole interaction. The old man introduced himself as Gene, the next door neighbor. My dad told me to come over and introduce myself, so I did. Gene seemed very kooky and aloof. Even my 12-year-old self could realize that, but he seemed nice, I guess. The next day, I was in the backyard playing Pokemon on my Game Boy. My dad was in the front of the house mowing. The rest of my family wasn't home. Oddly enough, over walks Gene wearing a farmer's hat and overalls, talking to me in his thick southern accent, asking what I was up to. He actually sat down at the table with me, which made me uncomfortable, especially considering he just walked into our backyard. Albeit there was no fence separating the front and backyard, but still. I told him I was playing Pokemon, and he knew what it was, immediately making Pikachu noises trying to be funny, but it was just unsettling. I started to realize there really was something off about this guy. My dad came to the backyard with a lawnmower, then turned it off when he saw Gene sitting next to me. He approached us and said hello with a smile, but I could tell based on my dad's face and tone that he was slightly confused what he was doing in our backyard. He never asked him that, but my dad told me I needed to go inside and wash the dishes. I knew he was trying to get me away from him. A few minutes later, my dad came in and asked me if Gene just walked into our yard, and I said yeah. That's when he told me he didn't want me around that guy anymore, and to let him know if I saw him again. It wasn't until a few nights later that I woke up to Parker growling and barking again. This time he was looking at the window. I got up to open the window just to hear if something was going on out there. Quickly after opening the window, without seeing anybody out there, I heard Gene imitating Pikachu noises again, in his creepy old man's voice. I ran out of my room screaming Dad repeatedly. When I told my dad Gene was outside my window, he stormed outside to check. But when he couldn't find him on the property, he went to Gene's house next door. But here's the twist. That Gene guy didn't live next door. An older woman answered the door and had no idea who he was. So my dad went to every single neighboring house, and nobody had ever heard of a Gene. My dad called the police to report the man. Police said they would be on the lookout for him, and it even made the news. We never again saw or heard from Gene, or whatever his real name was.
When a child is in the hospital, family does whatever it takes to stay. At Ronald McDonald House, we give them a community of support, warm meals, and a place to rest. Because when a child is in the fight of their lives, family stays. And Ronald McDonald House stays with them.
Back in 2017, I went on a family vacation to Fairfield Bay, Arkansas. We stayed in a cabin that was raised off the ground. I was about 5 feet 7 inches then, and I could easily stand underneath it. Now behind the cabin, there was a golf hole from a golf course, and next to that was a forest. The first day, there was really nice. After we arrived, we went back to the cabin and unpacked our things. I was staying in the loft above the living room. The loft had windows that were a little higher than the roof, kind of like a split-level roof, so I could look outside. I turned off the TV and went to bed like normal. I wasn't thinking about anything scary, just feeling tired and ready to sleep. Then in the middle of the night, I woke up for no clear reason. I could hear my sister breathing across from me, and the only light was a faint glow from outside. I was lying on my side, facing the window so I could see straight out of it. At first, I saw nothing. Then I noticed something sitting on the lower roof outside the window. It was a pale, very skinny, human-like figure. Then it raised its hands and cupped them around its face, leaning toward the glass like it was trying to look inside. It sat there and just stared at us for what was probably only a minute, but it felt like forever. I didn't move at all. I was scared that if I even twitched, it would notice me. Then finally, the thing turned away and started crawling on all fours down the side of the cabin, most likely heading back toward the woods. I kept lying there, completely frozen for another minute or two, just to make sure it was really gone. I wanted to run straight to my parents' room, but I was too scared. The whole living room was surrounded by big windows with no curtains, and the thing had just crawled down in that direction. To get to my parents, I would have had to walk past all those windows, and the thought of seeing it again outside the glass was worse than staying in bed. For years, I was terrified I would see this thing again. I thought it might show up at my basement window, or standing down the street when I took the trash out at night. Every time I watched a TV show with something that looked like it, I felt like I was going to cry. It took me a long time to finally shake that fear. Even now, sometimes I still think about it when I'm outside in the dark. This story happened during the summer of 2023, the last time I visited my grandfather's cabin. My parents, my brother, and I always slept in tents outside because there wasn't enough room for everyone inside the cabin. Normally, I loved sleeping outside under the stars. I never minded it at all, but after what happened on this trip, everything changed. Now I don't want to sleep in a tent ever again. I don't even want to go into the woods anymore. We arrived at the cabin on Friday and planned to stay until Monday. 4 days total. On that Saturday morning, I woke up around 9 o'clock. I crawled out of my tent and headed inside the cabin to make some coffee. When I walked in, my grandfather, step-grandmother, and mother were already sitting around the small wooden table. The window was cracked open to let in the fresh morning air. I poured myself a cup and stood there chatting with them for a few minutes, just catching up about how everyone slept. After finishing my coffee, I stepped back outside where my brother and father were already getting things ready for breakfast. The three of us gathered around the fire pit my grandfather had built years ago. It was just a simple circle of rocks, but he'd made it specifically for cooking meals outside during the warm summer months. I think we made pancakes that morning, but honestly, that detail doesn't really matter to the story. What matters is what happened next. I was sitting there by the fire, casually sipping my coffee and eating my breakfast. After a little while, my brother got up and said he was going to collect some more sticks to keep the fire going. So then it was just my dad and me sitting by the fire pit. I've never been a very talkative person, especially in the mornings, so we just sat there in comfortable silence. The only sounds were the gentle wind blowing through the pine trees and the soft crackling of the fire. Then all of a sudden, we heard my brother screaming. It came from somewhere in the distance, deeper in the woods. It wasn't a playful yell. It was real screaming. My family, who had been inside the cabin, my mom, grandfather, and step-grandmother, came running out immediately. My grandfather didn't waste any time. He rushed inside the cabin and came back out with his baseball bat. We all assumed it was probably just a bear that had scared my brother, or maybe even a coyote, though those were pretty rare in this area. The baseball bat was just a precaution to scare whatever animal it was away from us. But what came running out of those woods was something that nobody, and I mean nobody, could have ever expected or prepared for. There was a creature easily around 7 feet tall, chasing my brother as he sprinted out from between the trees. This thing looked absolutely starved, like it hadn't eaten a single meal in a decade. Its body was horrifyingly thin, with skin stretched tight over its bones. The creature's entire body was covered in red and brown spots and stains. At first, I couldn't understand what they were, but then it hit me. Blood. Old dried blood and fresh blood splattered all over its gray skin. And its teeth. I'll never forget those teeth. They were like razors, long and sharp and yellowed. I could see them so clearly because one of the teeth was actually hanging slightly out of its mouth, even when its jaw was closed. It followed him right to the edge of the woods where our clearing began. There was a small creek that ran along that border, separating the forest from my grandfather's property. For some reason, the creature stopped right there at the water's edge. My brother somehow managed to jump over the creek without tripping on any rocks or roots. Thank God he didn't fall. If he had stumbled even once, I don't know what would have happened. The second my brother made it across, we all turned and ran inside the cabin. All of us except my grandfather. He stood his ground outside, watching that thing across the creek. Once we were all inside and caught our breath, my grandfather finally told us the truth. He had actually seen this creature before, just a few days before we arrived at the cabin. But for some reason, he had decided not to tell anyone about it. Thankfully, all of us made it out without a scratch. The cats that live at the cabin were safe too, hiding somewhere inside during all the chaos. Nobody was physically hurt, which feels like a miracle when I think back on it. But even though our bodies were fine, the memory of that creature has been burned into our minds forever. I still see it sometimes when I close my eyes at night. My brother, though, something changed in him after that day. I'm not entirely sure if he saw something more out there in the woods, something he hasn't told the rest of us about, or if he's just more shaken up than everyone else. We didn't end up going to the cabin this summer, but honestly, it wasn't because of what happened that day in 2023, as much as that experience still haunts us. The real reason was that one of my grandfather's cats has been having serious health issues and needs constant care. On top of that, we just didn't have the time to make the trip, and we have our own cat at home who suffers from pretty bad separation anxiety, and we can't just leave her alone for several days. What makes this whole situation even weirder and more unsettling to me is that it happened in the early morning, around 9 or 10 a.m. The sun was fully up and shining bright through the trees. It wasn't some dark, creepy nighttime encounter like you see in horror movies. This thing came out in broad daylight, which somehow makes it so much worse. If it's bold enough to hunt during the day, what else is it capable of? But I might decide to go back next summer. My family keeps asking me if I'll come along, and I keep putting off giving them an answer. But if I do end up going, there's only one thing I pray for, that we don't see that creature ever again. My mother and grandfather have always been very close. They talk on the phone almost every week, sharing everything with each other. Because of their relationship, my mom eventually learned something that my grandfather had been keeping from the rest of us. He's seen the creature multiple times since we left that day in 2023. It's still out there, lurking around his property, near the woods by his cabin, and that terrifies me more than anything. I'm from a region of Pennsylvania called the Pennsylvania Wilds. It's a very rural area with thick forests that covers about a quarter of the state. I've lived here my entire life, so I know these woods pretty well. When I was a kid, maybe around 10 or 11, my cousin told me this creepy story. He said there were strange people living out in the woods who only came out after dark. At the time, it scared me pretty bad, and I didn't want to go near the forest at night. Years later, my other cousin, she's from the same area, told me something similar. She said they weren't just random people, but part of some kind of cult. She described them wearing weird masks when they came out. That really stuck with me, so when I got older, I decided to look into it. I searched online and checked local history, but I couldn't find any records or stories about them. So for years, I just figured they were both messing with me, trying to scare the younger kid with some made-up story. I didn't think much about it after that. Well, that was until last year. I had just left my house heading to work. It was early, just after 3 in the morning. My shift starts at 4, so I always leave around that time when it's still pitch black out. I was driving down the road near my place when I saw something move and step into the woods off to the side. At first, I slowed down thinking it was a deer crossing, but it wasn't a deer, not even close. Now it was definitely dark out there, but my headlights were on and they lit things up enough to see. The glow coming off the sides of my headlights made the road visible, and I could make out the dirt shoulder, the grass, and the tree line pretty clearly. There was enough light that I could see what I was looking at. And whatever stepped into those woods, it wasn't any animal I recognized. I should also mention that this all happened really fast, maybe 3, 4, or 5 seconds at most. Everything just kind of happened at once. But in those few seconds, there between the trees, I clearly saw this tall, thin, creepy man-like thing just standing there waving at me. Its whole body was this weird light brownish-gray color, like all one color from head to toe. My first thought was that it was some naked guy who got lost, or was in trouble, so part of me thought maybe this person wandered off from somewhere and needed help. I actually started to slow down more, thinking I should stop and see if they were all right. But then I got a look at its face, and as soon as I saw that face, I knew something was very wrong. That's when I decided I wasn't stopping for anything. Although now that I think about it, maybe it wasn't a smile at all. It could have been a nose or some other feature. I honestly don't know. I only saw it for a couple seconds and my brain was trying to make sense of what I was looking at. But whatever it was, as soon as I saw that face staring at me, I tore my eyes away from it. I snapped my head back to focus on the road and slammed my foot down on the gas. My car lurched forward, and I just kept accelerating, getting the hell out of there as fast as I could. The whole time I was speeding away, I had this strong urge to check my rearview mirror, but I refused to look back. I just kept my eyes forward and tried not to think about it. By the time I got to work about 20 minutes later, I had pretty much convinced myself it was nothing. Just a weird-looking dead tree that my tired brain misinterpreted in the dark. That had to be it. Right. On my way home from work that same day, I decided to stop at the exact spot where I saw that thing. I pulled over onto the shoulder and got out of my car. I was really hoping to find that weird dead tree I had convinced myself I'd seen. You know, just to prove to myself, that's all it was. But there was nothing there. No strange-looking tree. No odd branches that could have looked like a person. Just an old, abandoned road. More like an overgrown path, really. That branched off into the woods. Like nobody had used it in years. I stood there for a minute just looking around, but I couldn't find anything that matched what I saw. It took some real mental work, but I eventually managed to brush the whole thing off as just a weird trick of the light and shadows. Maybe my headlights hit the trees at a strange angle, mixed with the fog or something. I don't know, but that explanation seemed way more believable to me than accepting what I might have actually seen. So I put it out of my mind and went on with my life. Fast forward a few months to late fall, probably October or early November, and I was just relaxing at home one evening. I had this paranormal podcast playing in the background, one of those shows I listen to for entertainment. more than anything. This particular episode was about aliens called tall whites. I was only half paying attention at first, but then they started sharing listener stories. One of them was from someone in the next county over from where I live. That got my attention real quick. Naturally, my ears perked up immediately. I sat up straighter and turned the volume up on my phone. The story was from a park ranger who saw the same damn thing I did, except it happened about 20 years ago. There were some slight differences in what he described. He said the thing had small red eyes instead of black ones like I saw, and he specifically mentioned it had a long nose running down its face. But here's the thing. He had actually shined his flashlight directly on it, so he got a way better and longer look at it than I did. I only saw mine for a few seconds in the dim glow from my headlights. The red eyes he saw were probably just because of the flashlight beam hitting them directly. Like when you shine a light on animals at night, their eyes reflect back different colors. It's called tapetum lucidum or something like that. The thing probably has those same black eyes I saw, but the flashlight made them look red when the light bounced back. And the long nose he mentioned, that matches up with what I saw too. That long vertical feature running down the middle of its face that I thought might have been either a creepy smile or a nose. Hearing his description made me realize it was definitely a nose. After hearing that story, I just sat there thinking about it. How could he have seen the same exact thing I did if mine was just a trick of the light? The only answer I could come up with was that it was real. And if it was real, then maybe those stories my cousins told me when I was a kid were actually true. Maybe they really did see these same things out in the woods. I don't know if anyone else around here has seen them or not. Honestly, I can't bring myself to ask people about it because it sounds so crazy and unbelievable. Who's going to believe a story like that? My great aunt passed away last week, and I was able to get enough time off work to attend her funeral. My husband and I decided to make the drive from Colorado down through Kansas and Oklahoma to get to Northeast Texas where she lived. But the trip didn't start well at all. We'd barely made it onto the interstate and out of the city when our car battery completely died on us. The weird thing was, even though the battery was dead, the car alarm just kept blaring. It was so embarrassing. We managed to get it towed and bought a new battery at a shop nearby. We thought that would fix everything, but no. That stupid alarm kept going off the entire time we were driving. We must have looked insane driving down the highway with our alarm honking away. We pulled out a fuse in Kansas to stop the alarm, and we stayed off the toll roads as we drove through Kansas, only stopping to eat lunch. Everything was okay until we got to Tulsa, when the inside lights in our car wouldn't turn off, and we had to pull out another fuse. We got on the toll roads to get to Texas, but it was 9:30 at night and already dark. We didn't know the Oklahoma tolls only took cash, so we managed to pay the first toll by stopping at a bright gas station and getting a $20 bill, which we broke into smaller bills for change. We made it through a few more tolls, but then we ran out of cash, and the next place to get money was 20 miles out of our way. The woman at the toll booth wasn't happy with us at all. She writes us up and puts our license plate into the system. Then she tells us that if we don't pay at the next toll booth, the state troopers will be waiting to arrest us. Great. So we have no choice but to take that 20-mile detour to find an ATM. We finally get to the gas station, and guess what? It's been closed for over an hour already. The lights are off and everything. There's literally nowhere else around here to get cash. We're in the middle of nowhere, Oklahoma at this point. To make things even worse, our car starts stalling on us. Every time we try to start it, it just dies. We sit there panicking for a bit, trying different things until we finally figure out a trick. If we hit the gas pedal hard right after turning the key, the car will actually stay running. It's not ideal, but at least we can move. We decide we can't risk going back to the tolls without money, so we start looking for back roads. We find these old dirt roads that run parallel to the toll highway. Our poor car is bouncing and rattling over every bump and pothole as we make our way along these unpaved roads in the dark. We finally see the sign. It's painted on poster board, and the paint looks like it dripped down before it dried, maybe from the humidity. It looks like a kid's school project. We carefully turn onto the road. As we drive, we see animal eyes shining back at us in our headlights when we get close to the first curve. Right at the bend, a dog runs out into the dirt road. I slow down the car and the dog comes right up next to us and starts biting at our tire. We speed up to get away from it. A little further down the road, another dog comes running out, barking and chasing us. This one is huge, almost as tall as our car windows. Every single property we passed by made me think of that horror movie, The Hills Have Eyes. The houses looked run down and creepy in the dark, and I couldn't shake that unsettled feeling. Our car was absolutely worse for wear at this point, but somehow we managed to get back to the interstate and finally cross the border into Texas. We were so close now, just an hour away from the hotel room my mom had thoughtfully booked for us. Of course, things couldn't just be easy. At 1 a.m, this thick fog started rolling in out of nowhere. The highway winds through all these tiny towns, and with the fog, we could barely see more than a few feet ahead of us. I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my hands hurt. We had near collisions at least half a dozen times, cars appearing out of the fog, sharp turns we didn't see coming, all of it. My heart was racing the whole time. We were both exhausted and just wanted to be done with this nightmare of a drive. Then finally we pulled into the hotel parking lot at 1:30 in the morning, and we'd never been so relieved to see a hotel in our lives. My husband looked over at me, and we both started laughing. Like that kind of tired, delirious laughing, where you don't know if you want to laugh or cry. What a disaster of a trip. At least we made it in one piece, and that's more than I could say for the car. I'm 18 years old, and this happened on the night of July 4th. But honestly, I never really thought about reaching out to anyone to try and identify what I saw. I guess I was kind of trying to just forget about it for a while. So anyway, that night I was over at my girlfriend's house, and we were shooting off fireworks in her backyard until around 9 o'clock. We had a really good time, just the two of us watching the fireworks light up the sky. After that, I left to head back home. It's only about a 10-minute drive between our houses. I was driving down the main road that connects our two neighborhoods. It's this long stretch of road that's pretty much always deserted, especially at night when there's barely any traffic. When I got closer to the end of the road, there's this one street lamp that lights up that section. So I was looking at my reflection in the windshield like normal, and I could see my face pretty clearly because of the street lamp. But then I noticed something else. Right behind my shoulder, there was this other face staring back at me. It was clearly visible, like really clear, and it was white, almost pale white. I just kept staring at it for a second, trying to process what I was seeing. Then, as I kept driving forward and started moving away from the street lamp, the face just vanished. At that point, I was already pretty close to my house, maybe like a minute or two away, so I just stepped on the gas and sped up to get home as fast as I could. I know for sure that I wasn't just imagining things or psyching myself out or anything like that. So right after I saw that face, I immediately grabbed my phone and called my friend. I needed to talk to someone because I was freaking out a bit. I told him everything that just happened, and then I asked him what he thought I should do. Like in the case that it was actually a real person or some kind of attacker hiding in my car. Should I stay locked inside the car or get out? I honestly didn't know what the right move was in that moment. He thought about it for a second and then said, "You should get out because it's in the car with you." As soon as I pulled into my driveway at home, I didn't even hesitate. I jumped out of my car immediately, probably faster than I've ever gotten out of a car before. I was pretty scared, not gonna lie, but I knew I had to check and make sure. First, I looked in the back seat, shining my phone's flashlight around. Nothing there. Then I popped open the trunk and checked that too. Still nothing. There was absolutely no one in my car at all. I should probably mention some more context here. I still live on my parents' property, and our house is kind of out in the woods. It's pretty isolated, like we don't have any close neighbors or anything. The nearest house is probably half a mile away. My parents were actually out of town that whole week on some trip, so I was the only one home. They had asked me to look after the house and take care of our pets while they were gone. We have 2 dogs and a cat. So yeah, I was completely alone out there that night, which made the whole situation feel even creepier. Now let me describe the layout of our house real quick, so you can picture it better.
Hold the phone! Did you hear the blazing hot news from your friends at Verizon?
Downstairs, there's this big open space that has the kitchen and living room all connected together. It's pretty spacious and open. Then we have an upstairs area, but it's not like a full second floor or anything. It only covers about half of the downstairs because we have these really high arched ceilings. So the upstairs is more like a loft that overlooks part of the living room below. Anyway, I went inside the house to let the 2 dogs out one more time before I went to bed. It was getting pretty late by then, and I wanted to make sure they did their business before settling in for the night. Right after I walked in and said hi to my dogs, I suddenly heard this really loud crashing noise coming from upstairs. It sounded exactly like a big pile of books had just fallen over and hit the floor. We keep mostly books and storage stuff in that upstairs room, since we don't really use it for much else. So that's immediately what came to mind when I heard it. Then something really weird and unexpected happened. Jamie, our bigger dog, probably about 70 pounds, suddenly took off running toward the stairs. Before I could even react, he was charging up that spiral staircase as fast as he could go. And when he got up there, it sounded like he was trying to attack something. He was barking really aggressively, and I could hear him growling and snarling too. And it sounded like he was jumping around up there, like he was lunging at something. Here's the thing that really freaked me out though. Jamie has never gone up those stairs before. Not once in the entire time we've had him. Jamie has always been scared of it, or just refused to use it for whatever reason. He wouldn't even go up there to chase our cats and trust me. He absolutely loves chasing those cats around the house. It's like his favorite thing to do. But that staircase, he always avoided it completely, until that night. The 2 dogs were the only animals inside the house right now. Our cats were outside somewhere, so I had no idea what could have made that crashing noise upstairs. My mind immediately went to the possibility that maybe someone had broken into the house. Like maybe there was an intruder up there. After Jamie ran upstairs and was up there trying to get at whatever it was, I called him back down. I was really worried he was going to get hurt by whoever or whatever was up there. He eventually came back down to me. After that, there were no more noises coming from upstairs, and everything went quiet. So I started thinking that maybe everything was okay, and it was just a pile of books that randomly fell over on its own. Like maybe they were stacked weird and just toppled over. I made sure to lock up the house really well, checking all the doors and windows. Then, I headed over to my living quarters to go to sleep. I don't actually live in the main house. I live in this separate apartment space that my parents built. They lived in it temporarily when they were building the real house, and now I stay there. Even though I was really shaken up and scared, I still needed to take a bath. My shower has been broken for a while now, so don't judge me for taking baths instead of showers. I walked into the bathroom and closed the door behind me. Then I turned around to get in the tub, and that's when I saw it. The shower curtain clearly moved by itself, and I'm not making this up. It was halfway open when I walked in, and then it moved about a quarter of the way closed, right in front of my eyes. The curtain is hung level and has never done anything like this before in all the time I've been living here. It was absolutely terrifying to watch. The way it moved looked exactly like something out of a show like The X-Files. I immediately called my friend again to tell him about the shower curtain moving, but he couldn't believe what was happening either. After I finally got in the bath, trying to calm down, I heard these tapping noises. They were coming through the wall on my right side. Just tap, tap, tap. That was the last strange thing that happened that night. After the bath, nothing else weird occurred. I'm a strong believer in God, and I've always gone to church and prayed. But honestly, I've never really had strong feelings one way or the other about whether demon, spirit, ghost, or poltergeists actually exist, or if they can interact with our world in ways we can see and experience. I guess I never really thought about it much before this happened. Now I'm just trying to figure out what this was. I really want some help understanding what kind of encounter this might have been, and I honestly have no idea what to make of any of this. If anyone has any thoughts or similar experiences, I'd really appreciate hearing about them. I'm a music student at a small university in Canada, and I was staying over the summer instead of going back home. I asked my program director if I could get a key to one of the rehearsal rooms, and luckily he said yes and gave me access to the music building for the whole summer. The building itself is pretty old and has this permanent musty smell to it. It's kind of a maze inside. There are so many hallways, practice rooms, green rooms, and stairwells going every which way. You can easily get turned around in there if you don't know your way. But what's cool is the location, though. The building sits right next to this walking trail that winds through the woods. If you go past the building, there's a marsh on the other side. And beyond that, there's this big basin area that eventually opens up to the ocean. I had classes in this building during my first semester, so I'd already spent a ton of time there before summer even started. But I never once felt uneasy or creeped out being alone in the building, no matter what time it was. Now I'm a bit of a night owl, so sometimes I'd get really into practicing and would stay until 1 or 2 in the morning. The building would be completely empty except for me, and the only other people I'd ever run into were the security guards making their rounds at 11 p.m. They were always super respectful and professional about it too. They'd knock loudly before entering a room, or if they were coming around a corner where I couldn't see them. I never had a single issue with them, and honestly, it was kind of reassuring to know someone else was around checking on things. So I was practicing in this large room that I'd cleaned up and kind of converted into my own little studio space. It used to be a wood shop where the theater students would build sets and props, so it had plenty of space to work with. I'd moved some stuff around and made it work pretty well for rehearsing. There are 2 ways to get in and out of this room. One entrance is through these big double doors that open up into the common area. From there, you can get to the fire exit, the main auditorium, and the theater. The other way in is through the percussion room. You go through that room first, and then there's another door that leads into my practice space. So basically, when I'm in there working, I'm locked in from both ends. Both doors lock from the outside. So once I'm inside, I'm pretty much sealed off from the rest of the building. And it's nice because nobody can just wander in and interrupt me. The other night, while I was practicing, I heard a door open somewhere out in the hallway. I didn't think much of it. I just figured it was one of the other students who are also staying on campus for the summer. There's only about 5 of us total, so we kind of know each other's schedules by now. A little while after that, I heard some commotion in the hallway. It was a few of the music students coming back from a gig they'd played that evening. They were hauling gear and returning equipment to the storage rooms, so there was some noise with cases being moved around and doors opening and closing. One of them even knocked on my door and said who they were. They just wanted to say hi. They knew I was in the big room practicing because they could see my lamp was on. A few hours after that, probably around 1:30 in the morning, I started to wind down and pack up my stuff. I know I'm not really supposed to be in there that late. Technically, the building closes earlier, but I have this really important show coming up in a couple weeks, and I've been pushing myself to practice as much as possible. I was sitting on the floor near the big double doors, putting my equipment away, when I heard footsteps on the other side of the door. They weren't far away, just out in the hallway. I immediately froze and stopped what I was doing. I just sat there completely still, trying to listen more carefully. There's this square hole in the wall near the doors, maybe about 1.5 by 1.5 feet. I'm pretty sure there used to be an exhaust vent installed there back when this was a wood shop. It would have sucked out all the sawdust and debris when the theater students were in there cutting wood and building props and sets. Now it's just an empty opening and sound carries through it pretty clearly from the hallway into the room. And when I was cleaning the room and setting it up as my practice space, I found this thin piece of plastic lying around somewhere. I didn't really have a specific reason for it, but when I saw it, I just thought that would fit perfectly in that hole in the wall. So I grabbed it and stuck it there, basically covering the opening. So as I'm sitting there in my chair, staying completely quiet and listening to the footsteps, I literally see someone bend down and look through the hole. The plastic sheet isn't totally opaque, so you can kind of see shapes and movement through it. And I can clearly see the outline of someone's head and face as they crouch down and peer through that opening into the room. They're looking directly at me. Then, just as quickly as they appeared, they straighten back up and disappear out of sight. My heart was absolutely pounding at that point. The hole is probably about thigh-high on the wall, maybe 3 feet up or so. I was so focused on staring at the door itself and watching the thin crack of light underneath it that I only caught this person out of the corner of my eye. My peripheral vision just barely picked up the movement at the hole. Then they moved away really fast, so I only got the briefest look at them. But I could clearly see they were wearing brown clothes like a brown shirt or jacket and had black hair. None of the other students staying here for the summer match that description at all, as I know what they all look like, and security would absolutely never do something like that. They're pretty no-nonsense and strict about protocol. They always announce themselves really loudly when they're doing their rounds and make me open the door so they can check my student ID and make sure I'm supposed to be there. Especially not at 1:30 in the morning. If it was security and they'd found me in there at that hour, they definitely would have kicked me out right away. They probably would have been pissed too, maybe even written me up for being there after hours. But this person didn't say anything. They just looked, and then disappeared. I felt so creeped out and spooked that I couldn't even move. I just sat there in absolute silence, waiting for any sound or for someone to finally be like, "Oh hey, it's just me and I'm messing with you." I was half expecting one of the other students to start laughing or something, like it was all just a prank. But nothing, no response at all. I literally sat there probably 5 to 10 minutes. Then I finally heard something. I could hear the sound of someone walking away, heading toward the front of the building. It wasn't loud footsteps exactly, but I could hear that distinct sound of jeans rubbing together as someone walked, that swishing fabric noise. And I could hear a jacket rustling too, like nylon or something similar, making that soft scratching sound with each step. Someone was definitely leaving, but they were being quiet about it. I packed up so fast. I didn't even bother with most of my equipment. I just left my music stuff set up in there, grabbed my phone and keys, and got out. I went straight through the main door and bolted for the fire exit. Luckily, I only live about 5 minutes away, but I kept looking over my shoulder the whole way home to make sure nobody was following me. Every shadow felt like it could be someone. I'm sure it wasn't someone dangerous, but it really freaked me out. The thing is, I know all the music students staying for the summer. There's only a handful of us, and they all would have said hi or announced themselves. My biggest worry is that it was someone doing something sketchy. Maybe trying to steal equipment from the school, or something even worse. Security usually comes around at 11 p.m. every night to do their rounds and lock all the exterior doors. But during the day in summer, the main doors to the theater building are wide open. Literally anybody can just walk in off the street and wander around inside. There's no one checking IDs or anything. The building has so many long hallways and tucked away rooms that someone could easily find a secluded spot to hide out in. The whole building feels different to me now. Less safe, I guess. I should probably bring this up to security so they know what happened. Maybe they can be a little more thorough when they do their rounds. Make sure nobody's hiding out in there after hours. I don't want to overreact, but I also don't want to ignore something that could be a real problem.
A few years back, me and my girlfriend decided to take her family out to this old abandoned church we'd heard about in the woods somewhere in rural Georgia. A couple of our friends wanted to come along too, and we all thought it would be funny to prank her family a little bit. The plan was for our friends to hide out in the trees and start playing drums and doing some spooky chanting to freak everyone out. So we all drove out there and started walking around, checking out the old building and the area around it. After exploring for maybe 20 minutes or so, we were getting pretty tired, so we decided to sit down on the front steps of the church and catch our breath for a minute. There was this one dim street lamp nearby that was giving us just enough light to see each other on the steps. The tree line started maybe 10 feet away from where we were sitting, and beyond that it was pitch black. I mean, you literally couldn't see a single thing once you looked past those first few trees. It was that kind of darkness where your eyes just can't adjust, no matter how long you stare. Then, out of nowhere, we heard this sound. I swear I've never heard anything like it in my entire life, and I still think about it sometimes. It had this weird bleeding quality to it, kind of like a goat makes, but it was so much deeper and more guttural. And it wasn't just a quick sound either. It was drawn out and urgent, almost like a long, desperate scream. Now the craziest part was how close it was. This thing was literally right there at the tree line, maybe 10 feet from us. My girlfriend and I looked at each other and immediately started laughing a little, because we were sure it was our friends. We figured they must have ditched the drums and chanting idea and decided to try something different to scare us instead. So we started really playing it up, acting all terrified and jumpy, trying to make them think their prank was working perfectly. After a few minutes of us acting all scared, the whole thing was starting to get kind of old and annoying. So, we finally called out to our friends, telling them, "Okay, joke's over and you can come out now." But nobody came out of the woods. We stood there waiting for a minute, and then my girlfriend and I looked at each other and kind of shrugged. We figured they were probably just committed to keeping the prank going way longer than necessary. So we just brushed it off and figured they'd get tired of hiding eventually and show themselves. Anyway, we got up from sitting on those church steps and started heading in a different direction. We wanted to go check out the old baptismal font that was supposed to be somewhere down the hill, deeper into the woods on the other side. Her family came with us, and we were making our way down there, walking carefully because the ground was pretty uneven. That's when we started hearing it. Drums and chanting, coming from somewhere down the hill ahead of us. Finally, we thought, our friends were doing their original prank plan after all. So here's the thing that really messed me up. Our friends had been down at the baptismal font the entire time. They never moved from that spot. When we finally met up with them and started talking about what happened, they had no idea what we were talking about. They swore they didn't make any weird sounds or do anything near the church steps. So, unless they had secretly invited some random other people to come out there and help with the prank, people we never saw and that they've never told us about even to this day, then that sound we heard right there at the tree line came from someone or something else. And that thought really freaked me out. When I finally got back home that night, I was way too wired to sleep. I ended up staying up until like 3 or 4 in the morning, just sitting at my computer going down this rabbit hole. I looked up every single animal sound that exists in North Georgia. Foxes, bobcats, owls, coyotes, you just name it. And I also watched dozens of YouTube videos, listened to countless audio clips, read through forum posts. When nothing matched what I'd heard, I started expanding my search to cover the entire southeastern United States, just desperately trying to make sense of what we'd experienced out there. It's honestly the scariest unexplainable thing that's ever happened to me in my life, and I've thought about it so many times over the years. Even now, I can still hear that sound perfectly clear in my head, like I'm right back there on those church steps. And I don't think I'll ever be able to forget it, no matter how much time passes.